Moving forward, our next speaker is Professor Jodi Mindell. She's a world expert in pediatric sleep medicine, and particularly in the assessment and treatment of behaviorally based sleep disorders, pharmacological treatments for pediatric sleep disorders, and cultural issues impacting sleep. She's the director of the Sleep Center at the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. She's the vice chair of the board of directors of the National Sleep Foundation in the United States. She's in the board of directors of the Sleep Research Society, and she's chair of the Pediatric Sleep Council that is also associated with babysleep.com, and she's in the board of advisors for Parents magazine. So you must realize that she's a very popular speaker on issues of sleep, and of course a wonderful researcher with hundreds of papers published in peer-reviewed journals. So we are very lucky to have Professor Mindell with us. Please welcome her. Which one would that?
It's in Tel Aviv.
This one?
No, it's in the folder.
Oh, in here, yeah.
That's Sadeh.
This one.
Yes.
And
Nope.
no.
Oh, you're giving away my slides.
But I did very fast, so it's subliminal.
I did my talk. That's good. Let's see if this is on.
Yes, so you can just do this. Try.
Okay.
Yeah, and this you can put in your pocket.
Yep. I'll do this. Let's see if this is working. Yes? And where's the clicker? Okay. Well, thank you very much. I always, sometimes when I get that introduction, I realize I'm a true one-trick pony, right? I always say, if you're going to do something, do it really, really well and focus. I'm probably the most narrow psychologist there is looking at pediatric sleep. Avi was much broader than I was and worked in so many other areas. So this is, trying to decide if this is the hardest talk I've ever given. So it is a little bit. So I'm going to start with my science and then talk about Avi at the end, because I didn't think I could flip it the other way. But I'm already having a little hard time here, so we'll just move into science and go from there. As I said, I'm a full-time faculty at a very small university in Philadelphia. It's called St. Joseph's University. We once, a long time ago, had an incredibly successful basketball team, and so people knew me from that. But our basketball team has done really poorly, and so that's it. No one knows about St. Joseph's University. And Bill DeMint, how many of you know of Bill DeMint? Anyone? He is the father, grandfather, the head person who started sleep and sleep disorders, and he is retired, but we still sort of, everybody's kind of academic tree comes from Bill DeMint, and he's at Stanford. He started the very first sleep medicine department and the very first sleep medicine clinic, and is world renowned for it. And I felt my sort of crowning glory was when our basketball team was good, is he sent me an email because St. Joseph's University was playing Stanford, and he wished me well. And I thought, I'm well. So I don't have any more. And then the other thing I do is I'm at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We are a very large children's hospital, at least in the United States and probably worldwide. We have the largest pediatric sleep clinic. We see in our clinic something like 2,000 children over the year. We run about 3,000, 4,000 studies. And it's this really, really wonderful place to do sleep medicine. And I do a half-day clinic. I do Wednesday afternoons. And as I always say, it keeps me honest. Right? So as a researcher, you've got to be in the field. And you know, when you're facing that family who has a sleep problem, you can't rely on your science, right? It's all about helping this family and figuring that out. So I do a lot of CME talks, so I always do my disclosures, and here I think it's most important because Johnson & Johnson, primarily Johnson's Baby, has funded a lot of the work that I'm going to present to you and funded Avi's and my collaboration. And so one of the wonderful things about working with an Israeli is that sort of halfway between Israel and the United States is Paris, it's London, it's Rome. And so we always met in these wonderful places. And again, I'll talk about that at the end. So I decided in thinking about sleep and sleep in children, and I'm going to focus just on 0 to 3-year-olds. So Ron does the adolescents and I do the young children, is that I'm going to focus my talk about these 3 major questions, right? These are the questions that I get as a clinician. Someone was saying to me that if you tell people you're a sleep person, you hear their story, right? You immediately hear like, oh, I can't sleep. And I was talking to some of the people here earlier, is I'm really lucky because I can 90% of the time say, oh no, I only do children, right? So that takes out half of them. But the 10%, I answer every question. So I have to tell you that any email I get from a parent, I always answer them. I try to do that. But these are basically, if you boil it down, what are the questions, right? The questions are, why does my child have a sleep problem? Okay. The second question is, what should I do? And then the third thing is that when we talk about sleep training is, will I cause harm? And so what I want to do is talk about the science behind these 3 questions. So if I switch it from kind of my clinical hat to my academic hat, we always have to give our objectives when we give a talk, right? And so these are my objectives. The first one doesn't align with the question. I guess you could say, the question is like, is my child the only one? But so I'm going to talk about prevalence. I always have to talk about how common is this. Then I'm going to talk about etiology. What causes sleep problems? What are the risk factors for sleep problems in young children? I'll then talk about empirically supported treatments, and then I'll talk about this last one about outcomes. Okay, the last one is the one that we know the least about, is what happens, what's the outcome of intervention, right? Do we do harm? Okay? All right, so before I start talking about prevalence, so how many people here are parents? Including me, all right? So how many of you had faced at least a sleep problem, even if it was just for a few days? Right? Okay, it's universal. It's absolutely universal. And how we each define sleep problem is going to differ on what our own definition is, what our own parenting style is, and it's also going to differ culturally, and I'll show you. So one of the areas that Avi and I did a great deal of work on was looking at how common are sleep problems and what sleep looks like around the world. And so I'll talk about this study at different points in this talk, but we asked this question. It comes from the Brief Infant Sleep Questionnaire, the BISC, which is well validated. That's Avi's measure. Mikhail talked about that. It's the measure that's primarily used throughout the world in 0 to 3-year-olds. And we asked the question, and it's worded, do you consider your child's sleep a problem? So this is a parent definition, and I think that's important to understand that it's a parent definition. I have my tissues in my pocket, just letting you know in case I cry. So I'm trying to figure out where to put that. So anyway, this is a parent definition, and it doesn't mean that there is a sleep problem or what the sleep problem is, but just do you think there is a sleep problem? And all these data are published. And we've been doing global studies, and we've done different studies at different times. All of this work is funded by Johnson's Baby. So we have these different populations. So originally, our data came from this predominantly Caucasian group. So it's about 8,000 families, 0 to 3. It includes Australia, New Zealand, United States, Canada, and United Kingdom. Okay. We have a predominantly Asian group, which is a little over 22,000 families. And we've done another study with another 11,000 later, but I'm just focusing on our first study. 22,000, that's the predominantly Asian countries you can think of. China, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Indonesia, all of those countries that you can consider. And then we later on have collected data in Brazil. We have about 3,700 families from Brazil. And then just most recently, this is the most recent paper came out, is on Arabic-speaking Middle East. And it's about just under, it's very hard to collect data there. It's about 669 families. Israel is in there, but again, it's Arabic speaking. And what we do is I'm trying to see what my next slide is. What we do is these are all internet-based studies, right? So this is an internet-based study, which means that these are the high-income, in some of the countries, high-income, high-educated families. We collected in the exact same mechanism everywhere, which is there's a website called Baby Center. Baby Center was started in the United States. It's now global. It's across most languages. And Baby Center, at least in the United States, captures something like pretty close to 80% of all pregnancies in children. I mean, it is the go-to site in the US, and so they have it in all these languages. So we pop it up on Baby Center, the questionnaire, and the questionnaire just is a pop-up, and it just says, will you answer some questions about your child's sleep, and then they just fill it out. In the United States, we can collect data for the researchers in here, you'll be stunned. 5,000 families, we collected in about 48 hours. I mean, it's just, I know, right? You guys, I know. It's really good to have financial partners who can support this stuff, and then an area that parents are very concerned about. So when you look at this, when you put all those databases together, we have about 33,000. And if you look at the map, green is predominantly Caucasian, blue is predominantly Asian. We then have Brazil in yellow and Middle East in orange. And I'll keep referring to those colors as I show you the slides. You can see, though, we have large areas we haven't gotten. The place I want to go is, you can see Africa. We have nothing in Africa. And most of Europe we don't have, and we don't have Russia, but we're getting there. In South America, we really did this study. We have the data, and then we found out later that they didn't collect the data appropriately, so we have to do it again. We also found out when we did Brazil, because what we do in every country is we translate it, we then back translate it back into English, and then we check it. So what happened in Brazil was that they translated it, they back translated it, they sent it to me, and then whoever was in Brazil never read it themselves. They popped the study up, and somebody took it and complained about the questionnaire. And what happened was the company that did the translation used Google Translator. Seriously? And the only reason is I started popping the questions into Google Translator, and I was getting it, and the questions were completely wrong. Anyway, Baby Center, the company we had paid so much money to, they were so mortified. They said, all right, well, anything we can do for you. And we're like, okay, we want Middle East. So we got Middle East out of it. So they redid the study. So that's why we have Middle East data. All right, so here, and I'll keep talking about the colors. So here's just that question, do you think your child has a sleep problem? Okay? And the thing that's amazing me, and remember, blue is predominantly Asian, green is Caucasian, yellow is Brazil, and orange is Middle East. And you can see it varies from anywhere from 10% to 76% of parents say their child has a sleep problem. The 3 Chinese-based countries, so Hong Kong, Taiwan, and China are all super, super high. And we thought, again, it was a translation issue, but we realized that it was translated separately in each country, back translated Czech. So it wasn't a questionnaire problem. In the United States, right here, it's about 30%. I'm not sure what it is in Israel. You know, what's amazing is we never did Israeli data. I know. That's because of our financial partners. Middle East, it's about 45%. And I'm not sure where Israel would be, but I would guess right up there. You have a lot of babies here. A lot of babies. It's incredible. So the other thing we've done is we've looked at, what are my parents most concerned about? And I'm going to talk about this app a little bit later, but we have an app that is, again, funded by Johnson's Baby. And part of that app, amazingly, is that parents can submit a question to the Ask the Expert. It's called Ask the Expert. It's a section of the app. And then we answer it. I'm the last one on the question. I have a team of my trainees who answer every question. They push it to me. I read literally every question. I check their answer. I edit it. And then we push it out to parents. And we usually answer every question in 48 hours. We've, at this point, I've lost track, I think we probably at this point have answered something like 7,000 questions over the last 4 years. So this is, of course, the academic in us said, oh, it's a study. So we answered, we looked at the first almost 1,300 questions and classified them by what are parents asking about. So this is what are parents most concerned about. And this is what you find. And remember, questions, it doesn't add up to 100%. Because this is a typical question. Are you ready? A typical question. My baby is 5 months old, and falling asleep is okay, but it's a bit of a problem. She wakes up 3 times at night. I'm about to do sleep training, and should I also do it at naps? You're like, so you have to code it. Bedtime problem, night wakings, sleep training, nap question. Okay? And then at the end, they'll be like, oh, and how much sleep should you get? So then it's a sleep schedule question, too. So it's not, so you see a lot of overlap. But what you find when you look at this, remember 0 to 3-year-olds, is you find that 30% of questions are about waking at night, 28% are about a sleep schedule. What time should she go to bed? How much sleep should she get? Should she nap? Another quarter have bedtime problems. And if you added them all together, even these numbers, there's an overlap, but about 80% of all questions are these three categories, right? They're caring about falling asleep, difficulties with waking at night. The thing that also strikes me just as much is what they don't ask about. So at this point, out of every 200 families, we're asking about sleep disorder breathing, about snoring. Okay, so for the pulmonary people, they really need to target this. I think if we were to redo this study with a full data set, I think it's probably 1 out of 500 questions, right? Remember, in this data set, if you just get a couple of questions, it popped. I rarely answer about sleep disorder breathing. We also made a word cloud. It's my first academic paper and only academic paper I've ever seen with a word cloud. How cool is that? And what you do is you throw it into a thing and you see what questions pop. And it's just every question, almost 1,300 questions. So obviously sleep is the #1 word. So if you've never seen these before, what it does is it takes the common words. The bigger the word, the more frequently it occurs in your data set. And so you can see night is really high, wakes is really high. Right? And this is all my baby's whatever old. But it's all about night wakings. That's what they care about. Okay? My husband is an academic. He's a biologist. So when he started seeing this, I think it's like wordcloud.net. He then started taking everything he's ever written and throwing it into WordCloud. He started taking his lectures. He took his syllabus for his course and he showed it to his students. So what's really neat to do is you can take a word cloud and see what words pop. So the word like exam ends up really big on between the syllabus. So that's the prevalence. So that's prevalence in terms of that. So the next question is why does my child have a sleep problem? So it's etiology. What leads to sleep problems in children? A collaborator of mine, Jodi Owens, who's at Harvard at Boston Children's, and I came up with this model. And what we look at is we show that if you look at sleep, what are the things that all affect sleep? And so there's all these different issues. So there's sociocultural values, right? So it's values. How important are things to you? How important is it that your child, are you an attachment-related parent? Sleep practices, so schedules. Are you bottle feeding? Are you breastfeeding? Are you co-sleeping? The environment, right? This really affects families, especially low-income families, where we're worrying about families without heat, without air conditioning, where there's light. Do they have a bed? We work with a nonprofit in Philadelphia that provides beds to families who have children who do not have beds. And what we found is we've done studies with it. If you give a bed to a child, not surprisingly, their sleep increases, and others add factors. Whoops. Okay. We look at families, right? So we look at socioeconomic status, we look at family stress, we look at parental competence. Parental competence is just how good are they as parents? How good are they at limit setting? Okay? We had a family who came to our clinic and they were being followed by one of our morning shows. They were filming it. And so this family came in and it was, as a clinician, it's pretty obvious to you these things. But afterwards, the family left, and the film guy, the film crew came to me, and they're like, Dr. Mindell, I just have to tell you, in case you miss it, this family's really bad at setting limits. I'm like, really? And they were like, oh, you should have seen it last night at their house. It was terrible. And the kid they'd ask him to pick his pajamas, and they had like 10 pairs of pajamas out, and they would, it was a half hour choosing. So and in my head, I'm thinking like, well, yeah, of course this family can't set limits. And one of the reasons that was obvious to me, not just being in clinic with them, but the family told me that this little guy, he was about 2, is the only thing he would eat was McDonald's hamburgers. We saw McDonald's, your kosher McDonald's, which we took a picture of earlier. He only ate McDonald's hamburgers, and he was in daycare. So, you start asking the question. So I asked the question, well, how does he get his McDonald's hamburgers for lunch? Is they would drive through, McDonald's drive-through every morning on the way to daycare to get him his hamburger, right? And I'm thinking, well, no kidding, this family can't set limits. So I said to the reporter, the film guy, and I'm like, oh, thank you so much. What are they going to say to him? Like, oh, yeah, of course. I've been doing this a long time. We look at health, so children who are ill, they're on medications, they have reflux. We look at development, right? Just development, language development, motor development. So we were looking at videos yesterday, looking at kids climbing out of their cribs. Once you can climb out of kids, all of a sudden they're little escape artists, and so they're not sleeping as well. And I also talk about cognitive. So little kids, when they learn language, they learn what to ask for or what to say to get mom and dad's attention. So when you are 3 years old, the thing to do is say you have to go potty. No parent can say no to that, right, as they're in the middle of toilet training. Or they start saying, like, I love you, and you're like, oh, I gotta go, he's too cute. And then the last thing is sort of social emotional. So we look at attachment, we look at temperament, right? Difficult kids are difficult sleepers. So this is the model that we've come up with. You saw this slide before. This is Avi Sadeh and Tom Anders' model that they came up with. It's all looking at what predicts sleep. And what I can tell you from my sense of this model is it's really complicated, okay? So so when you're seeing a family in a clinical situation, we know that that there's so many factors going on, and we're trying to sort that out. The area that we've spent most of our time looking at in terms of intervention are what are called sleep onset associations and limit setting. And what we're looking at is sleep associations. Sleep associations are what happens when you're falling asleep that you need to replicate when kids naturally wake up during the night. Okay, all children wake up, and Avi's work shows, between 2 and 5 times per night. So if you nurse to sleep at bedtime, you need to nurse back to sleep at 2 in the morning, right? I had a family, a dad, I saw them with their second daughter. So what he did with both his daughters is he put their bottom in one hand, he put their head in the other, and he would do this to help them fall asleep. This dad had the biggest arms you could imagine, right? It was only to his second one, he was like, I'm done, I can't do this anymore. I usually show this video, but it wasn't working. This is a little girl in a sink, and this is in the United States. And what it shows is that, I don't know how the parents started this, but if they turn the water on, she falls asleep. If the parent turns the water off, she wakes up. And then she goes to turn it on herself, right? It's your association. Whatever happens to fall asleep is what you need to fall back to sleep. And we use the diagnosis called the behavioral insomnia of childhood. All right, so that's almost all the research in child sleep sort of shows that, and we have lots of research that supports that. From that very, very large database, that global database, we've looked at it. Avi does all the beautiful modeling that we've done. If we look at what predicts night wakings, the number one thing that comes out is feeding to sleep or back to sleep. That sleep association counts for about 17% of the variance, and falling asleep independently. But feeding and independently overlap, right? If you're feeding to sleep, they're not falling asleep independently. But I also think that we need to look at it like those models show in this bigger picture, right? So we need to look at it that not just sleep associations, but a bigger picture. And I think it's really good for the developmental people as we think of it within Bronfenbrenner's model. And the ecological model shows that there's the child, lives within a family, lives within an environment, lives within a culture, okay? And so what I want to do is just touch on each of those and just show you a little smattering of research that's been done to sort of just kind of prove the point and show you where that research has come from. So child influences, every child temperamentally is different, but even looking at biology, what happens in a child biologically, and I think it pulls to you, you're looking at adolescents biologically, but we also think about very, very young children. And there was this phenomenal study put out by Joseph et al. It was a UK study, came out in 2015, where they looked at the biological processes. So they took 35 infants, they followed them from from 6 days to 18 weeks, and they measured all of these different measures. So they got melatonin, they got cortisol, they got core body temperature, and they measured it, some of them they measured it every day, other ones they measured it once a week. And what they found was that at 8 weeks of age, you start getting this day-night rhythm. You start getting predictability. And what the first predictability you get is predictability of cortisol. So cortisol changes, rhythmicity comes first. Then melatonin rhythmicity comes a week later. After that comes sleep, right? That's followed by changes in core body temperature with rhythmicity, and then the clock gene expression. So you get this very, very stepwise. And so they have this great graph which shows that so here is cortisol. Again, this is when you get rhythmicity. You get cortisol, then you get melatonin, then you get sleep, then you get temperature, and then you get circadian gene. All right, so what's happening biologically? And so this is why the answer to every parent when they come to you, right? The first 2 weeks of having a baby, maybe the first 8 days of having a baby, it's like wonderful and it's honeymoon period. And then right around 4 weeks, it's, oh my God, I don't think I'll ever survive this, right? And that's when parents come to us and they're like, is there anything you can do to get her to sleep? And you're like, no. No, there's just no. The answer is no. So here's, you got to wait till that cortisol and the melatonin to sleep. And I think this just supports our statement. I do think, to be honest, I do think there's some environmental things you can do, but you are waiting for that. Okay. And what they did, they had a group in there that they identified later who were on. There's somebody, I don't know this person in the UK, Gina Ford. Anyone know Gina Ford? She has one of the most popular parenting books in the United Kingdom, and she's all about schedule. It's hardcore schedule from the very beginning. And those babies who are following the Gina Ford model, this was all shifted earlier. So if you do really structure babies' lives, you can affect that biology. So that's child influences. We look at family influences. All of this work was done by Avi in conjunction with Liat, and some of Liat's work done with Avi. So I'm just, again, touching on a few things. So father involvement, I love this study. We do not focus on fathers enough. But what we found in this study, and Liat could talk about this much, obviously, better than I, is that father involvement in nighttime care in the first 6 months predicts better sleep, increased sleep consolidation at night. Parent cognitions with Liat's beautiful, beautiful work looking at cognitions shows that how parents think about sleep and think about their child predicts sleep. If I'm right from reading it, is that even before their parents, how they think about sleep and how they think about the child will predict whether or not their child will have a sleep problem. Am I too loud? If he's turning me off, I'll know I'm getting the video. And then the last most recent work, which is this parental tolerance to cry, and I just can't wait to see that research come out. And if any of you, I'm not sure if you're going to show the video of that tolerance to cry paradigm, but it's phenomenal. But what you find is that parents who have children with sleep problems, they respond to cry much faster, and this is the paper that came out in 2016, and they also attribute that crying to distress, much more likely to consider it distress rather than say communication or just, a lot of parents can tune it out. I once worked with a family, they had 4 children, they were in for their 4th child, and the mom said to me, as long as I, the mom, am not crying, I figure we're all good. I'm like, okay. She had no distress to cry. She was like, okay. And then cultural influences, and I just want to touch on this study that we did, and I'll talk about sort of why we did this study. So this is just bedtime. This is on the first 2 studies, the first 2 groups, the predominantly Asian and the predominantly Caucasian. Remember, green is Asian, green is Caucasian, blue is Asian. This is what time does your child go to bed. Now, when we went into the study, I thought, oh, we're going to see like 15-minute differences. I was so naive. So this is bedtime. In New Zealand and Australia, they're going to bed at 7:30 at night. When you look at Hong Kong, it's 10:15 at night. Okay? Middle East is right up there at the very, very, very end. Okay? So I always say, if you are a sleeper, you have to live in New Zealand or Australia. I mean, they're just, everyone's in bed all very, very early. And you can really see how the Caucasian-based countries are going to bed much earlier. Wake times are just about the same everywhere, and naps are just about the same everywhere in 0 to 3-year-olds. Changes 3 to 5-year-olds, but it's about the same. So if you put it all together and you look at total sleep times, it lines right back up. Again, green, as you remember, is Caucasian. Those children are getting much more sleep. So in Japan, if you put it total sleep time across a 24-hour day, you find in Japan kids are getting about 11.5 hours of sleep, and New Zealand it's over 13 hours. Right? It's almost 2 hours difference. It begs the question, does it matter, right? Because in Japan and Korea, those countries are doing really well. So, and the babies are doing really well. So it does that question. All right, so I've talked about kind of prevalence, and I've talked about sort of why do children have a sleep problem. So let me talk a little bit about treatment. What should I do? And I always have to start with that empirically supported treatments. In 2006, Avi and I and some of our colleagues did the review paper for Standards of Practice. It's the very first Standards of Practice paper on any aspect of sleep in children across any organization. And what we did was we reviewed all the studies out there, and what we found is that if you look at all the studies that were out there were 52 studies at that time, we find that for bedtime problems and night wakings, behavioral treatment works. Okay, so we know that. When we did this study, when we took it on, we're like, oh, this is going to be great. By the end of it, we're like, why in the world would you ever choose to do something like that? It's a horrible process if any of you have ever tried to do them. But Lisa Meltzer and I felt incredibly guilty. Lisa felt guilty and wrote me into it, and so we did it again in 2014 because we felt like we needed to update the literature. We did it in a slightly different way. It was a meta-analysis this time, and so when you do a meta-analysis, you need to have the same data points, types of data collected across the studies. So we're only able to, and had to be randomized control trials. So 16 studies made it into that, a little over 2,000 participants. They had to have at least 12 participants. They had to be a behavioral treatment, and they had to collect sleep onset latency or night wakings. So when you do that, you come up with this incredibly complicated table, and all I can do is tell you the take-home message, which is that treatment works, right? Children who are in the treatment arm do better than children in the control arm. All right, so you know, again, I always feel like I have to have the science behind it. And so clinically, I do it in my clinic. I do a huge amount of parenting talks. But one of the things that Avi and I did the most of was our goal, which was to provide treatment and make it accessible. And I think you talked about that before. And he had the very first online intervention here in Israel. And we met with the Johnson's Baby people, and the meeting that this all came about from was in London. And we were meeting the Johnson's Baby people, and they said, well, what's your dream? And what we said was our dream was to make treatment accessible to all. And so, but Avi, and I have to say Avi's the one who did it, Avi was the one that said, if we're going to do it, though, we need data. And so we collected the data, and that's where all that global data came from, was that in every country that we were going to have an online intervention, we wanted to know the data for that country. And so that work has taken off because we never expected it. We thought, oh, we'll just get these 15-minute differences, but we'll have the data. And it's just become sort of eye-opening. So in terms of accessible treatment, we've come up with a number of different models. We have internet-based treatments and we have app-based treatments. Johnson's Baby has been incredible up to in making these accessible for all. There's no payment to it. They're empirically based. There is no product related to it. It's not a marketing tool for their product. I mean, they'll sometimes put it on in a different aspect of it, and they've never impacted the content. I really take off my hat to them of how much they've done a great job. And so in, I don't know what year it was, maybe 2008, 2009, we first launched what's called the Customized Sleep Profile. And the Customized Sleep Profile is in English, and then it was published in all those countries. Every country you saw had one in their language. And you came to this first screen, and you can see here Avi's name. It's right here. It was developed by myself and Avi along with Johnson's. And they first filled out the BIS, the Brief Infant Sleep Questionnaire. You went in. One thing Johnson's brings to it is the most incredible graphic artists, so they can make it beautiful. So the parents filled out the BIS. They would do that. It would take about 3 to 5 minutes. And then what they get is they get a normative comparison. How does their child compare to other children of the exact same age in that country? And again, it's all based on published research. They get an algorithm that talked about whether their child is an excellent, good, or disrupted sleeper. We had a huge amount of discussions about what that word should be, right? You don't want bad, you don't want poor, so we had all these discussions about that. And then it gave customized advice. So behind it is this very complicated algorithm, and based on your questions, it would tell you what to do. So this was talking about how the child fell asleep. It's a one point in time. The researchers and Avi and I, this came out, it rolled out in all the countries, as we said, but we have to know if it works. We have to know if it works. So we did an efficacy study. Just want to see what time I am. And so what we did was we did the whole research study. It was a study that had 264 families. It was a 3-week study, randomly assigned to a control group or one of 2 different intervention groups. It ended up that we first did just the internet intervention for one group, and then the internet intervention plus a bedtime routine because we knew it worked. And so we put it ended up there was really almost no difference between these two groups. And all the children had to have a sleep problem. And I'm just going to show you a little bit of the data. Doing studies like this, it's sometimes like sprinkling fairy dust. It's just like, oh my God, all the data comes out so beautifully. So this is each group. Here's the control group. Every slide the same. This is baseline. This is after 1 week of intervention, after 2 weeks of intervention. And what you see is the control group almost never moves, and the 2 intervention groups, it reduces dramatically. This is number of night wakings. The number of night wakings, for example, in this group reduced from almost 2 to 1 a night. It ends up, these 2 groups, by the way, are no different, really no different. Maternal confidence, how confident are you in managing your child's sleep? Again, you find control group doesn't move, 2 intervention groups do. And this is mom sleep, that in 2 weeks post-intervention, you see this dramatic improvement in mom sleep. Here the control group did slightly move, but not as much as the other 2 groups. And so this was good sleepers. So at baseline in the internet group, only 2% of moms are based on a standardized measure. This is not mom saying I'm a poor sleeper. This is a measure. 2%, and it increased to 33%. In this group, 6% to 48% of moms. In 2 weeks, you see improved kids and moms. And then it's moved on because the world has moved on in technology. And so the next thing that came out was Johnson's Bedtime App. I think I tried going onto the App Store yesterday. I think you can download it here in Israel. It's again out. I think it's in English here. It also is out in many, many, many countries. This has that Ask the Expert section. It has the customized sleep profile. We've done it all in the same place. At this point around the world, the app has been downloaded over 500,000 times. So it's really gotten the word out, and it's gotten that out. And then the most recent project, which you mentioned, was babysleep.com. Babysleep.com just got launched this January. I put together a pediatric sleep council, and our dream, again, was to just make information accessible to parents that's evidence-based. And it's just this beautiful site. It's only out in English. I'm not sure we have the ability and strength to try to do it in other languages, but if we ever get the funding, we will. It was initially funded, the videos by Johnson's Baby. This for me has just been a total labor of love. This is just my doing it because I really want it to be out there. So it's available. All right, so let me sort of finish up. What time? I have about 15 minutes? Yeah? Okay. Or a little more? Okay, so let me talk a little bit about outcomes. So what happens when you do sleep training, and does it harm a child? All right, so this is the question that comes up. Are behavioral interventions harmful? Right? And parents are, if you go to the media, and one of the reasons we did that website was because we wanted to pull together information for parents at one place that they could see what a group of pediatric sleep experts from around the world all kind of are endorsing and supporting. And so what you find, though, is if you go online as a parent, it's the scariest thing you've ever seen. Okay? All it does is tell you how horrible it is. The New York Times, which in the United States is one of the most, I don't know. I was going to say respected papers, but I don't know at this point in our political climate. But they have a blog. They have a parenting blog, and they did a story on sleep training. There's a pediatric practice in Brooklyn, New York, run by somebody who's French. He's the primary pediatrician, and they tell people to do sleep training at 8 weeks. Which is very, very early. So a reporter called me, I talked to her about it, and I said, I warned her. I'm like, I have to warn you that this is going to be it's going to blow up on you. And when that post went up, her blog post about doing sleep training at 8 weeks of age, they immediately, within like 24 hours, had about 3,500 comments. She's writing me like, this is crazy. I'm like, normally they get like 50 comments, okay, on one of their blog posts. And it ranges from, yes, I did it with my baby is the best thing, maybe like 10%, and then 90% was, you should be turned in as a parent, your child should be taken away, this is the most horrible thing you've ever done, this pediatric practice should be shut down. I mean, just huge contention about this. And that's what parents are reading. And so I cut my slides back a bit here, but this is a typical thing that comes out. So this is a magazine. It's called Psychology Today. It's a magazine, and I can't say it enough times. It's a magazine. It's not peer-reviewed journal, okay? But the way they put it up there, it looks like a magazine. So this is Psychology Today. And this was one of the articles that came out in 2011. And again, I could just randomly choose these. They're everywhere all the time. And it was called The Dangers of Crying It Out, and it's by a PhD. And so they put it in this very academic text. And it says, what does crying it out actually do to the baby and the dyad? Do you like how they use the word dyad, right? They use all this language like it's super academic. And this is the answer. The answer is neurons die, right? So if you're a parent, and it talks about, you talked about this yesterday, Ron, when the baby is greatly distressed, the toxic hormone cortisol is released. It's a neuron killer, and it gives a reference. Okay? And so many of these things are presented to parents. What they do is they put in this academic language, they give references, and so it looks like it's academically supported. So of course what do? Is I take every one of these and I track them down, right? I pull every academic article and I track it down, and I'm just going to show you one of the articles of where it came from. So what are the data cited? So this was on blog, this was a breastfeeding site, and so what it says, where's my bill? Okay. So what it says is, it says, experts warn that allowing a baby to cry it out causes extreme distress to the baby. And then it says, according to a University of Pittsburgh study by Dr. DeBillis and 7 colleagues published in Biological Psychiatry in 2004, children who suffer early trauma generally develop smaller brains. Right? So I, as a parent reading this, will think, oh my God, if I do sleep training to my child, they're going to have a smaller brain. Right? And if you do this similar exercise, by the way, with like vaccine, all of that, they're very good at presenting these data. But if you follow the data have nothing to do with the topic. Okay? So so I looked up Dr. DeBillis. Have you ever heard? Do you know this?
I'm on that paper.
You're on that paper.
Got a bunch of abused children, and looked actually made list odds. Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, they said Biological Psychiatry 2004. That article really doesn't exist. It's 2002. As an academic, I'm like, you don't even cite it, right? So this is the paper. Are you on this paper?
Yeah,
wait, this one.
So a series of them in the series.
There you go. So anyway, so this is superior temporal gyrus volumes in maltreated children and adolescents with PTSD. Right? So what they did was they did MRIs on these 43 children and adolescents who were so severely abused that they'd been taken away from their homes. And then they did MRIs and they had normal controls. And what you find is that severely abused children who have been removed from their homes, and you look at their brains later, is you do see changes in the brain. Right? Sleep training is like 3 nights, right? Sleep training is like forcing your kid to be in their car seat in the car when they cry all the way to grandma's house. I mean, it's nothing like this. These are not studies that are being done in any way on children after sleep training, okay? So, and again, if you follow all these studies, they all look the same. So what do we know if we look at the empirical evidence? So myself and Melissa Moore, my former postdoc and now colleague, we looked at 35 studies on sleep training and looked at all the secondary outcomes. So beyond sleep, what do you find? And it's what you expect. So if we look at the child outcomes, we find that mood-wise, kids are happier, more playful. If you look at the child behavior checklist, you find that daytime behavior improves. Look at temperament, doesn't change, which I think is really important, right? We're not trying to change kids' personalities. Health, things like decreased obesity. If we look at the parent-child relationship, which is where everyone talks about the dyad, right? What you find is that kids are more secure, better attached, right? It improves parent-child relationships. It improves maternal confidence. And if you look at the parent outcomes, parents are better, right? All the way across the board. So they sleep better, their mood is better, less likely to have postpartum depression, their relationship is better, it's all better, okay? And there's been 2 studies that have done long-term outcomes. This is by Harish Hiscox group. Anna Price was her graduate student. They did a 5-year follow-up of children who had gone through behavioral intervention, randomized to behavioral treatment or controls. And what they found was that there was absolutely no difference 5 years later in terms of things like child mental health, child-parent relationships, maternal mental health, no difference. So, you know, what do you do if you're the media, right? The media, and you are on that side of sleep training is bad. They spun this a lot. And what they spun is, if at 5 years out, no one's different, why bother doing sleep training? And what I say is that if you do sleep training, you have 5 years of better, right? And then there's no difference. So it's just always looking at it in two different ways. And then the other study that just came out was by Michael Gratisar in Australia, does beautiful, beautiful work. They did 43 infants, 6 to 16-month-olds. It was a randomized controlled trial. And what they found was that sleep outcomes were significantly improved. They also looked at cortisol, that stress hormone, and they found that it decreased with sleep training. So these kids it's not increasing. And at 12-month follow-up, a year later, there's no differences again in emotional or behavioral problems, no differences in attachment. Okay? And I know Avi, he and I hadn't talked about kind of what was happening with it. I know you all were looking at kind of that night to night and looking at not just how's a group do, but it's how's a child do. What stress is put on that child with sleep training. So if I pull this all together and I talk about what do we know and future directions, and I go back to those three questions, and prevalence, we know it's really highly prevalent. We know parents are concerned about night wakings and bedtime problems. In terms of future directions, right, we all need to work on making sure health professionals know that their children have sleep problems. We need to objectively define what a sleep problem is. If we look at etiology, what do we know? It's multifactorial, it's parent-driven, it's culturally driven, it's environmentally driven. We need to keep expanding the focus. We need to keep looking at and so we see this in twins all the time. We have fraternal twins come into our clinic. This one's a great sleeper and this one's not, right? We had one mom come in and say, this one's the angel and this one's the devil. And I'm like, oh, that poor kid, he's labeled as a devil and because he's waking up at night. But why is that? And what should we do in terms of treatment? So what do we know? We know there are empirically supported behavioral treatments. We need to continue to focus on prevention, right? I mean, I don't want babies crying. I don't want to be doing sleep training. If we can prevent it, that would be great. We need to continue to make it accessible to all. We're working very hard now, myself and my current postdoc, of trying to make it accessible to low-income families and get the word out there. In the United States, something like 90% of all individuals of childbearing age, so like 20 to 45, have smartphones. So it's accessible to them, but I don't think in many other parts of the world that's true. And we need to start really thinking about what's the best treatment for this specific child. Okay, so again, it's sort of pulling together all of our work. All right, here comes the hard part. Oh, good, I have one more slide, thank God. So in terms of outcomes, so what do we know? We know that at least the studies done do not show a negative impact. But we need to keep looking at those short-term and long-term impacts. And we really need studies like Avi was doing of looking at night-to-night cortisol, what happens. And I think Michael Gratisar did a beautiful job with that. Oh, this is the hard part. So I'm just crying before I think about it. So for Avi, so as you know, thank God for Johnson Baby and other times, we have seen the world together. He was my friend, he was my colleague. I just pulled a few pictures together. This was us, this is the most recent time I saw Avi, was in Taipei, Taiwan, with two of our colleagues from Asia, from that group who does the Asia work, both are from Singapore and from India. Here was Manchester, United Kingdom. We were at a meeting together. Lisa Meltzer was at that meeting. Porto Alegre, Brazil. In Porto Alegre, Brazil, we went to the front desk and we said to them, well, what can you do here? And they said nothing. So they did. I couldn't believe it. So in Porto Alegre, this was at some bizarre kind of place for dinner. They had this giant Santa Claus and Mrs. Santa Claus. It didn't make any sense. It was not even that time of year. But so anyway, in Porto Alegre, Brazil, what Avi and I always did is we would sit in cafes. He liked to drink coffee. And we would sit for hours and hours talking. And here is our incredibly good friend, Mary Carskadden, who we met. That's how we met, Avi and I. That Mary Carskadden is where Avi did his postdoc at Brown University, and I was an intern there. Different times, but she was our connector. So I've seen the world with him, I've worked with him. If I look back, I probably talked to Avi, at least by email, almost every 2 weeks for 10, 15 years. I mean, he was one of my closest friends. And one of the things that Avi also was such a model for was that family was everything. So I'm sorry, Gil, I didn't have a picture of you, but this was when I visited here last time. That was, I can't believe she's 6 now, right? Here's Avi with Roni. I think this is in northern Italy. Is that right? And this was when I last visited with Yael. So I just want to end with saying you're missed. This is my last time here. Thank you very, very much. Thanks, Avi.
Your questions are standing between you and your lunch. So, but we can still take a few questions if you like.
All right, so let me say one last word. I didn't know if I could, so I'm going to try. We'll see. So this, I didn't mention this picture. So this right here is a feather. Oh, I don't know if I can do this. So when I heard the news about Avi, I was confused, as Adi knows, and I heard on Sunday, and then Liat, I thought the message was that Avi's father was in the hospital. And then the next day I heard from Liat. And when I walked up to my car that day, this has never happened to me, I've lived in my house over 20 years, when I walked up to my car, right in front of the door of my car was that feather. And I felt like that was Avi saying hello and goodbye to me. And I knew at that moment that it was over. So Avi, I had that on my kitchen counter and I had to put it in the stock. So thank you. Thank you.